now, as we have concluded now, the dominance and the types of dominance, your complete, incomplete, and your codominance. Now, in this lesson, now I will be going now into other patterns of inheritance, starting with the multiple alleles. Now, multiple alleles, we are saying here one characteristic is controlled by more than 2 alleles. So remember that Mendel had discovered that a characteristic is controlled by one gene, and one gene contains 2 alternative forms, which are your alleles. But now, we have discovered that now there are those characteristics that can be controlled by more than 2 alternative forms. So your typical example here, then we've got the sex chromosomes as well as the sex characteristics. Sex chromosomes, this is the last pair of chromosomes which usually determines the gender of an organism. So there are characteristics that are carried by the sex chromosomes. Those sex chromosomes are called the gonosomes. This is the scientific term, gonosomes, very, very important. Sometimes a question can come and say, differentiate between the sex chromosomes or your gonosomes and the autosomes. So very, very important. So we are saying here, we know that in terms of the female, your sex chromosome is the XX, and in terms of the male, you have the X and Y. So there are characteristics now that are carried by these chromosomes. So those characteristics are called the sex-linked characteristics. So this now concludes the patterns of inheritance. This concludes our patterns of inheritance. Now let's move and look at the variations now. Variations. Let's look at variations. So in terms of variations, very, very important, you need to understand the definition of your concept, which is the definition of variation, the importance of variation in agriculture, the types of variation as well as the causes of variation. What causes this variation? So very, very important, variation, we say this one now, is the differences amongst organisms of the same species. So, if for instance you talk about the cattle, you can have cattle, they are all cattle, they belong to the same species, which is the cattle species. Or we talk about human beings, we are all human beings, we belong to the same species, which is the human species. But there are human beings that are tall, there are those that are short. Human beings that are black in color, the other ones that are white in color. So those differences is what we call variations. The differences amongst organisms of the same species is called variation. Now, why is variation important? Very, very key, this question for learners to know. Why is variation important in agriculture? Number one, we say this is the foundation, or it is the basis of selection and breeding. In other words, when you select organisms, you select organisms that have the desired characteristics. So how can you see that? You can have cattle, you have your dairy cows, but there's a cow that produces more milk, and there are those cows that are producing less milk. So the ones that have desired characteristics, they get selected. So we can see the differences, and then now we select. Those that are selected, they are allowed to breed or produce the next generation. So it is the basis of selection and breeding. It is also used to improve the crop varieties and the livestock breeds. So it introduces variation. So this is very, very important. It's used to improve the crop varieties as well as the livestock breeds over time. So types of variation, let's say we have got 2 types of variation. There are types of variation. There are only 2 types of variation. You have continuous variation and the discontinuous variation. These are the 2 types of variation. Continuous variation, you will see there is a complete range of forms of characteristics. So this is a concept that we need to highlight. There's a complete range of forms of characteristics. But in terms of your discontinuous variation, there's a few clear cuts few clear-cut. So this one, there's a distinct forms of characteristics. Continuous, there's a complete range of forms. Here, there's a distinct forms. Continuous, complete range of forms. Discontinuous, there's a distinct forms. So you'll see the intermediate. There are no intermediates here between the characteristics. But in terms of your continuous variation, you'll always see the intermediates. You can have this height, this one, this one. So there are always those intermediates. But in terms of discontinuous, there are no intermediates. Characteristics that are showing continuous variation are called quantitative characteristics. So this one is a quantitative characteristics. And then characteristics that shows discontinuous variation, those ones are called qualitative characteristics. So we've got two classes when we classify characteristics, quantitative and quantitative characteristics. Your quantitative characteristics will show continuous, and your quality, they show that is continuous. So your continuous variation or quantitative characteristics now, they will always give rise to a range of phenotypes that blends from one extreme to another extreme. But in terms of your discontinuous, they produce the distinct phenotypic classes. So phenotypes that are controlled, the phenotypes in terms of your continuous variation, those phenotypes are controlled by many genes. Remember, we said many genes that control a characteristic, we call it polygenic inheritance. So they are controlled by the polygenes. Then the phenotypes that of the qualitative traits are controlled by one gene. So in terms of discontinuous variation, those phenotypes, they are just controlled by one gene. Now we look at the examples now. In terms of your continuous variation, you talk about the height, you can talk about the weight gain, the milk production, the egg, their main characteristics. All the agricultural production characteristics, those ones are examples of continuous variation. Then you talk about the pod shape, the seed shape, the color of the seed, the chicken comb. So these ones are controlled by what? By the qualitative characteristic. If you talk about the shape, for instance, it's either your seed is wrinkled or it's round. So you can easily see now, there are distinct forms. But in terms of the height here, you can have this height, can have this one, can have this one, so it's continuous variation, not one. So very, very important that you can see the differences between continuous and the discontinuous variation. So we also move, and now we talk about the causes. What causes variation? What causes variation in our organisms? Remember these differences now. What causes these differences? So variation is caused by the combination of the internal and external factors. So the internal causes of variation are called the genetic factors, and the external causes of variation are known as the environmental factors. Genetic causes, these are the factors that are connected with the genes and heredity. In other words, your genetic causes can be passed on from the parents to the offsprings. But your environmental causes cannot be passed on from the parents to the offsprings. These ones are controlled by the environment. Examples here of the genetic causes, we have got the meiosis, you have fertilization, and mutation. So we already know that during meiosis, there's a process of crossing over, which leads now to different or the sharing of genetic material. So that causes variation. Fertilization, it's a chance process. We have got half genetic material coming from the father, half genetic material coming from the father. Then it forms new variations. Mutation, the sudden change in the genetic material of a cell. Then here examples of your environmental causes. So we talk about nutrition or diet, we talk about the sunlight, the pests and disease, the shelter, the water, there are many. So those ones now, they will cause your external variation. So this now is the end of your what? Your patterns of inheritance as well as variations. So now we are moving to the next lesson, which is the last one now, where we are going to talk about the selection and breeding. Remember, we said variation is the basis of selection as well as breeding. So part 3, we look at selection as well as breeding. Selection as well as breeding. Now let's look at selection. Very, very important. The selection, this one is the process of choosing. What is selection? So this one is a process of choosing. You are choosing the organisms that have the best characteristics. Organisms that show the best characteristics, they are chosen, and then after choosing them, you allow them to mate so that they can produce the next offspring. So only the best organisms are chosen. Now, in terms of selection, we've got 2 types of selection. There are 2 types. Learners, they always confuse the types and the methods. In terms of the types of selection, there are only 2. It's natural selection and your artificial selection. Natural selection, the nature selects. So organisms that are well adapted to the environment, they get selected. So I always use the example, if we take an animal from East London or from Matatiele, which is a very cold area, that organism, you take it and then you breed that organism in Limpopo, where the environmental conditions, temperatures are very high. You will see that the organism might struggle to survive. So the nature selects now. Or you take an organism from Limpopo, you breed it in the Eastern Cape. So that organism might struggle to survive because of the environmental conditions. So the nature selects. But artificial selection, the human selects organisms that have the best characteristics. You can see this cow produces good milk, you select it to produce. So that is artificial selection. So we look at now the methods. How are these organisms selected? How are these organisms selected? There are 4 methods of selection. And what is very nice about these methods is that they will always come in your question paper. They will always come. So very, very important. You have the mass selection, the pedigree selection, the progeny, and the family selection. The first 3, your mass selection, your pedigree, as well as the progeny. These ones are used to select both the animals and the plants. But the family selection is only used to select the animals. So very, very important. Let's look now in details in terms of the mass selection. Individuals or organisms here are selected based on their individual performance. So sometimes the mass selection is known as individual selection because organisms are selected based on their individual performance. You have got 2 cows. The one produces good milk, the other one is just produces poor milk or less milk. So the one that produces more milk gets to be selected to produce the next offspring. So that one is called the mass selection. Organisms are selected based on their individual performance. Pedigree selection, here organisms are selected based on the history. Very, very important. The performance history of their ancestors. So we know that your ancestors were performing, then the organism gets selected, not because we say this organism is best, no, but because we know that your ancestors, your forebears were very good in terms of this particular performance. Then you get selected to produce the next generation because we hope that you have inherited that particular characteristic. So that is pedigree selection. Then we have got the progeny selection. Progeny, very, very important. When we talk of the progeny, progeny means offspring. Progeny means offspring. So organisms, they get selected based on the performance of their offspring. But we need to explain this a little bit more. We are not selecting the offspring here. We select the parent based on the performance of their child. We can see that the child is very good in terms of performance. then we select you to produce the next child again, because we hope that the next child that you are producing will also inherit this performance that you have, because we have seen this performance from your offspring. So that is progeny selection. The last one is the family selection. Family selection. This one, individuals or organisms are selected based on the performance of their close relatives. So we measure now your siblings and or your half siblings. So your family selection is more or less the same as the pedigree selection. But the difference here is that we need now to measure here your close relatives, your siblings or your half siblings. How are your brothers and sisters performing? Then you get selected. But pedigree, we only look at the performance of your ancestors. Then you get selected. So these are the methods of selection that are used in agriculture. Then we move from these methods of selection. We talk about breeding now. This is the last chapter in our lesson for today. Breeding now, it's in simple terms, this is the mating of the male and the female to produce an offspring. So in other words, when you talk of breeding, you allow, it's a sexual reproduction type, this one. It's a sexual reproduction. Remember, in terms of reproduction, we have also dealt with the reproductive techniques, which are asexual reproduction. So breeding, it's a sexual reproduction. You allow, there's a physical pairing of the male and the female. They come together to produce the offspring. That one is breeding. So in terms of breeding, learners, they need to understand the breeding systems. Breeding systems. So you have the inbreeding as well as the cross-breeding. Inbreeding and cross-breeding. These are the two main breeding systems. Your inbreeding is just the mating of two individuals, the male and the female, that are closely related. They are closely related, these ones. So you can have the sister and the brother, you can have the daughter and the grandfather. So just that organisms that are closely related, it's your inbreeding. Then your crossbreeding, this one is the mating of individuals that are not closely related. So your keyword here, your organisms are not closely related, but in terms of inbreeding, your organisms are closely related. So very, very important. Now, under your inbreeding, you have got these two, your line breeding and your back crossing. Under your crossbreeding, you have got these three, outcrossing, species crossing, as well as the upgrading. You have got those breeding systems now. But remember, generally, once your organisms are closely related, we can categorize it as inbreeding. Once they are not closely related, we can categorize it as a what? As a crossbreeding. But now we look in details, we must pay attention to the finer details. If now we are crossing the siblings now, or organisms that have a common ancestor, they have a common ancestor. It's the half siblings, or it's a brother and a sister. So that one now will be your what? Your line breeding. But if you talk of a daughter and the grandfather, or it's the son as the grandmother, as you can see, remember here we're talking about animals. I know it's going to sound funny. So you can have, in terms of animals, you can produce a male bull, a male calf, and then in 4 or 5 years' time, that male bull can breed with its mother. So it's not fun in terms of the animals. So once you have the daughter or the son, in this case it's your male bull, crossing with the grandmother, that one is called the back crossing. But remember, these organisms are closely related. Then we come and talk about the outcrossing now. Outcrossing, you have got two breeds of the same species, but different breeds. For instance, you can take an Afrikaner bull and a Hereford cow. Afrikaner bull and a Hereford cow, you mate them. That one now is your outcrossing. Outcrossing. Remember, they belong to the same species, which is the cattle species. But these are two different breeds. We have got the Afrikaner bull and the Hereford cattle. Or cow, sorry, Hereford cow. So you cross them. That one is outcrossing. Then we have got the species crossing. This one is when you are crossing two species that are different, but they are closely related. Two different species that are closely related. And a typical example is when you have got a donkey and a horse. So you have got the horse species and the donkey species. You cross them, they produce a mule. So that one is species crossing. You take a donkey and a zebra. They produce a z-donkey. So that one is called the species crossing. Two species that are different but are closely related. Then we have got the upgrading. This one, upgrading, it's done intentionally. We have got a purebred. Remember the concept of a purebred. A purebred male. In other words, it's superior male. That is a purebred. You cross it with the inferior females. The purpose here, you want to upgrade your herd. So a typical example, we have got the sheep that you normally have at home in our rural areas. You have got those sheep, they produce poor wool. Then you go to the Don Merino. You buy a ram that is superior, a purebred ram of Don Merino. That is good in terms of wool production. You mate this ram, which is a purebred, with this inferior sheep or ewes, so that you want to improve your herd. So this is what we call upgrading. Right, so this now concludes the basic agricultural genetics. So very, very important. This question will always come in question 4. And it's one of the questions that there was an improvement from 2024 in terms of the final exams, in terms of the learners. They actually performed. Most learners, they were able to get answers there. You know, in terms of your Punnett square, it will always come. Make sure you get the marks in terms of your Punnett square. You know what? They use the keywords, a purebred, a hybrid. A hybrid is heterozygous, purebred, homozygous. And then you move, and then you also write, when they say you must determine the genotypic ratio, make sure that 1 RR, 1 BA. So make sure that the genotype appears. Phenotypic ratio, 1 red is to 2 pink is to 1 white. So the phenotype must appear. So that is very, very important. And then you move to talk about patterns of inheritance. They will always come, especially section A, they will come, match column, one word, they will always come. But your polygenic inheritance, make sure you indulge into calculations there. They might give you the calculations as well as epistasis. Then you move and then you look at your variations. Variations will always come. Your types of variations always come. Continuous, discontinuous, variation, they will always come. In terms of the characteristics, quantitative, qualitative characteristics. Quantity, quantitative, they go with continuous. Quality, qualitative, they go with discontinuous. So you also know the examples. You talk about agricultural production here, your milk, your egg production, your weight gain. Then this side, talk about the seed shape, the seed color, and all those kind of things. Then you move, you look at the causes, which is the genetic and environmental causes. Under genetic, you have got those 3, fertilization, meiosis, and mutation. Then under environmental, you've got a variety. There are many. You are spoiled for choice. Then you move, and then when you go to selection, very, very important, your selection will always come. There is no question paper that will come without the selection methods. So that one is a given mark, because by the time you go to exams, you know that selection methods are there. I don't know the question paper for June, for instance, now, for September, for November, but one thing I can guarantee you is that the selection methods will always be there in the question paper. Same applies to the breeding systems. The breeding systems will always come in your question paper. So that is question 4. Very easy to pass, but very tricky if learners, they don't give it time to study your basic agricultural genetics. All the best, the class of 2025. So we have come to end of our lesson. You can leave your questions on the comments. Don't forget to leave the name of your school so we give shout out to your school. Please share, recommend, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you for watching. See you on the next lesson. Thank you very much.